Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss the useCallback hook further. In order for us to do that, we're going to have to modify this a little bit. So in order for us to modify this component, I want to duplicate this button. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say that this button has the text update. What happens here is that we know our component will essentially rerun and re-render every time car items updates. So we're going to rely on that in order to make sure that we understand when our functional component is being rerun. Inside of GoToCheckout I'm going to change this function. And what I'm going to do is I want to log out some value that we store inside of useState. So I'm going to bring in the useState, and I'm just going to call this temp value. And I'm going to initialize it with the value A. What I'm going to do inside of this callback is just console log the temp value. And then what I'm going to do on this button is that whenever you click this button, I'm going to set temp to B. And that's all I'm going to do. Now, what's going to happen? Well, let's save our code and let's come back to our application. Here in application, what I want to do is click Go to Checkout. As we know, we are console logging out our temp value. Here, what's going to happen is that when I run this function and add a bunch of items, what's happening again is that our application is re-rendering. Not our application, but our component. Go to checkout, we'll still log A. Nothing changed there. If I hit update though, now I know that temp has been updated to B. But every time I click Go to Checkout, it's still logging A. And the reason for this, despite all of these changes, is because the function is memoized, meaning that the scope of all of the values inside of this function are all being kept and memoized. React doesn't know that it needs to update this because temp on the outside has changed. Even though we called septemp and React has re-rendered this component, every time in the re-render cycle, it sees this call and it says, oh, this is a memoized callback because it used the useCallback hook. I don't need to reinitialize this function ever. The only way that that can happen is when you add that to the dependency array. Now, if we save this, and when we come back to the application, if we refresh, now on initialization, when I click the Go to Checkout, I get A. When I click update and then I click Go to Checkout, now notice that it says B. So this is an important error that you want to understand about your dependency array with useCallback. If you anticipate anything inside of this function that it needs to rely on in order to run the purpose of this actual function, make sure you include it inside of your dependency array. Because if you don't, then React simply just memoizes the value. And that is how this useCallback works. I hope now through this example, you get a better idea of what it is that's actually happening under the hood with this useCallback hook. So now let's just revert our code back. And now we have a good idea at the very least. You can now go through your application and you can wrap these inside of a useCallback if you want to, just to see and just to work with it to understand how to add things to the dependency array and get your code to work consistently. But it's very straightforward. The main idea is that you're memoizing the function, not the output of the function, but the function. So that's it. Now that we get that, let's move on to the next video.